Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Hoop Theory Podcast. Today I'm going to be talking about the Denver and Minnesota Game 2 that just wrapped up last night. As I'm recording this on April 21st, it's a Tuesday. Waited till the afternoon to record this just because my allergies have been flaring up really bad today. And finally decided, I'm not going to get any better before the day is over. So might as well just sit down and get this one recorded. So I'm going to go through my in-game notes to start with, of just kind of, the recap of this game if you didn't get to catch it yourself, or even if you did, just kind of a refresher, in detail breakdown of kind of the key moments of the game. And so right away in this game, there was not much of a difference in the game plan or personnel, it seemed like, right off the bat. Same matchups and everything as the first one. But it honestly was just kind of the reverse of the first game in terms of which team got going quickly. With about 4.5 minutes left in the first quarter, the Nuggets had a 24-11 lead. And that was basically the culmination of their 17-0 run that they had just finished. Because at the 8:30 mark of the first quarter, it was actually 7-11 in favor of the Minnesota Timberwolves. Bones Hyland checked in, made a difference right away in multiple quarters in this one. But especially in that first quarter, he had a couple big threes, ain't got to the line. So, in that final 4.5 minutes of that first quarter, Minnesota was able to make up some ground, get the score to 25 points for them. Denver finished with 39, though. So the offense on the Nuggets end didn't really slow down in that final stretch. And that first quarter, honestly, was amazing. The atmosphere there in Ball Arena looked electric, especially with, there was weirdly 3 4-point plays by the Nuggets made in that first quarter, with 2 of them belonging to Jamal, and then that third one being Tim Hardaway Jr. Tim Hardaway Jr. also had an awesome stretch, I think right before that maybe, in the first quarter, where he dove out of bounds on the baseline to save a ball. The Nuggets started, taking it up in transition, and then Bruce Brown actually turned it over around half court. And so it started going back the other way. And so Tim was the only guy on the Nuggets left down there on the other end. And so he stepped up just outside the charge circle, got set, took a charge, and, got the play going the other way. And that was like one of the biggest crowd pops, I think, of the game. People were going crazy. He was on the ground, just like shaking around, being all excited. The energy was just great at that point in the game. But then early on in the second quarter, that's when all that changed. Right away in the second, though, things were still kind of continuing with a big three-pointer from Tim Hardaway Jr. again, and then Jamal had a floater to push the lead to the highest of the night of 19 points at 44-25. And then in the non-Jokic minutes to start this second quarter, which is, for those who don't know, the sub-patterns of the Nuggets, Jokic usually plays, especially in the playoffs, he'll usually play all 12 minutes of the first quarter or so. Maybe sit out maybe like the final minute or two of the first if we're lucky. And then you'll sit the start of the second quarter, come back in around the 7 or 8 minute mark, somewhere in there. And then basically copy and paste that same pattern for the second half as well. Although they do try to get him back in earlier on in the fourth quarter than they do in the second. But in the non-Jokic minutes in that second quarter, obviously Jonas Valanciunas being the backup big there, his minutes were pretty brutal. I think they were honestly in the first game as well. It just got covered up by the fact that in that second quarter, in the first game, that Jamal started really getting going for the first time in that game. That's when the Nuggets kind of started to run because Murray was being guarded by Aodosunmu, and that's when he first started getting comfortable, kind of getting to his shots and feeling good, getting in rhythm. And so even though I felt like there were some glaring errors and some spots where it was like, I don't think Val's minutes are doing all that good here, he looked pretty good in the plus minus in that stretch there because of, the Nuggets kind of going on a run. But I will say, in all fairness to Valanciunas, in this game, it wasn't all his fault, his negative impact in this one, because I'd say one of the biggest errors that he had probably was the technical foul that he received, which I don't understand at all how he got that. I feel like I haven't heard anybody talk about it even, to be quite honest, like questioning the validity of it. I mean, clearly it was a bit of just a physical play between he and Rudy Gobert, but the call on the play immediately was a foul, a loose ball foul on Rudy Gobert on a free throw, when they're boxing each other out on the free throw lane, because Gobert's forwardly boxing him out, using his arms to try to box him out. And Val just kind of physicals back a little bit, like kind of extends his arm. They're both just kind of fighting for position a little bit. And like the thing is, Val's like motion was not excessive or like any more physical than Gobert's was. And then Gobert got called for just, a common foul. But then I guess the reaction that Val made immediately even before the whistle was blown, and only before the whistle was blown, there was no, continuation after the play was dead. I guess that little just, exchange of force was what got him a technical foul for some odd reason. I don't understand that at all, but okay. But, honestly, that really felt like a bit of a momentum swinger in this one, even though it did give Gobert, I don't remember if that was, he picked up like 3 fouls right at the beginning of the second. Like he had 0 fouls in the first quarter. And then by like the 9-minute mark in the second quarter, he had 3. And that was one of them. I can't remember if that was his third or if that was the first or if that was the second, to be honest. But they were all right then in that same little stretch. And so that was another big, story of this game was Gobert checking out with foul trouble early on in the second quarter. And the Wolves, having to go to the Randall and Naz Reid as their bigs. I thought Jokic in that first half, even though like that was a pretty big stretch, the entire stretch that he had after he checked back in the second quarter, he was being guarded by those guys, and he was not aggressive at all. He ended with 6 points in the first half, like he did in game one. But the difference was in game one, he was being guarded by Gobert that entire time, and he was, employing the strategy, which I said in my previous, breakdown of the series that I thought was a good enough strategy. It was understandable at least. Him stretching Gobert out from the basket, keeping him away from making plays inside on the defensive end. So he's popping, out on the perimeter every time on DHOs and pick and rolls, which, is just making him not aggressive to go, get his own shot inside, obviously. But at least it's helping the Nuggets offense overall without, Gobert's presence inside. And Jokic is still, using his gravity as a screener and everything to get people free. So I don't really have a problem with it when it's Gobert on the floor. But then when you have Randall and Naz Reid as the big men in there, like them inside is not the same level of, factor nearly as Gobert, obviously. So you're not too worried about them making plays inside. And you would much rather just take advantage of the mismatch there where Jokic can score one-on-one against those guys. But he didn't go to that at all in the first half. I'm not sure why, honestly. But getting back to my notes, though, the T-Wolves got going in that second quarter and getting the line. Dante had 2 big threes. Ayo Dosunmu had a 3 as well. And especially Julius Randle, he was rolling in that second quarter. And he was making plays, scoring and initiating. And also had a couple big blocks in transition in the first half. And, he had a couple in game one as well. Which is just another big storyline here with his health and his ability to, be explosive when he has runner's knee is what he's dealing with. And so there's moments of the game that he definitely looks hampered, but he's still like gutting it out and making big plays and still looking explosive in moments, while he's kind of laying back for a little bit and struggling to get up the floor and stuff like that for a few plays. And then he'll kind of like flip a switch and turn it on when he needs to all of a sudden, it seems like. But so big credit to Ant just gutting it out and being huge in this game despite the physical wear and tear on his body. But so all of that Timberwolves action there got the score from 44 to 25, like I said before. From that point, they went on an 11-0 run to make it 44-36. And then both teams kind of started trading baskets for a little while with things leaning, a little bit more towards Minnesota's direction. That stretch lasted most of the second quarter, basically until the 2-minute mark exactly. Minnesota was up 8 at that point, 64-56. But then in those final 2 minutes, the Nuggets closed the gap, capped off with just an insane full court, like behind the logo, not even to the logo yet, at center court, with Jamal Murray, hitting that buzzer beater heave to end the half. And that tied it up at 64-64. 23 points in that first half for Murray. So kind of it was going like I had said in my thoughts between game one and game two, where I talked about, how Murray was going to be big in this series because I thought, there's just not a lot of guys to go to for the Wolves to really like stick with him off ball and be able to get to the point where they can guard him in isolation. He can, by his movement off ball and using screens, he can get a weaker defender on him to attack in isolation. But spoiler alert, that dried up pretty hugely in this second half. That he ended with 30 points on the game once again, like he did in game one. even though 23 obviously came in that first half. And I would say, honestly, the biggest factor in that was not any adjustments, really. I mean, I think them putting Dante DiVincenzo on him was something that they did more this game than last game. I'm not 100% sure on that. That was just what it seemed like to me watching. And I thought I saw some, good possessions there for Dante. But also down the stretch, there was a lot of really, really good plays for Jaden McDaniels guarding Murray, because Murray didn't seem to be able to shake free of anybody anymore all of a sudden in that fourth quarter especially. He honestly just seemed out of gas, not able to, take off with a burst. He would try to take off and change directions all of a sudden really quickly, but it was just kind of muted compared to what it normally is. And then a guy like Jaden McDaniels or somebody would just kind of stay with him exactly. And then he would he just used his energy up for that possession and kind of just stood there and was trying to regain his energy a little bit and rest. But Jokic seemed to kind of be deferring to Murray because of how he had it going so much in that first half. I think Jokic was kind of like, oh, when Gobert comes back in this fourth quarter, and in the second half, after being out with foul trouble for a while, Jokic kind of went back to the popping game plan. And so, he was kind of just standing there with the ball waiting for Murray to get free and run to him for a handoff. But Murray really didn't have it, to be honest. But anyways, I am kind of getting ahead of myself there because I'm kind of skipping over that third quarter where Jokic definitely was going to his shot more, scoring more one-on-one. In that third quarter alone, he had 16 points going against Naz Reid and Julius Randle as his primary defenders on the interior. So kind of like what he did in game one, basically carbon copy of that. But like I said before, I wish he would have started doing that earlier in this game because Gobert wasn't on the floor for that whole second quarter. So I think the big story of this game, honestly, to just kind of go ahead and get ahead of myself once again, the big story in this game, I really did feel like it was Jokic just waiting too long to do what he needed to do, which ultimately left very, very little margin for error. And so then in that final stretch, they just rolled snake eyes. There was just a few possessions really that they had there where they were going to the bread and butter, and it just resulted in missed shot after missed shot for those few possessions there, which, it's hard to say that was something that was real necessarily because of, like I said, I thought that Murray was gassed. So I think that had a big part to do with it. But then also it was such a small sample, it's not like I don't think the Wolves figured anything out in terms of shutting down the two-man game. It's just I think the Nuggets spent too much time not doing what they needed to do to secure a win in this one. But back to the third quarter, this is where Bones had his other pretty big stretch, which was really short. It was less than 3 minutes, but he had 7 points. At the end of the third, 93-90 Denver. And then to start the fourth with Jokic on the bench once again, because of that pretty ugly stretch with Valanciunas in there, David Adelman and the Nuggets coaching staff elected to go with Aaron Gordon at the 5, which I mentioned in the preview as what would be the ideal kind of sub-pattern for the Nuggets in theory. But the reason why I don't like it in this series or right now, and also the reason I mentioned in the preview for why it might not work well, is because of protecting Aaron Gordon's minutes load should be a priority for the Nuggets right now. With him, not having a lot of reps, being healthy this season, kind of just coming into the playoffs, and also having those soft tissue injuries is something that could be flared up. You don't want to put too much strain on his hamstrings and everything. And this problem is made immensely worse by not having Peyton Watson healthy to be playing some more minutes alongside Jokic to allow Aaron Gordon to spend more of the minutes as the backup 5. But even then, in this series, Aaron Gordon as the backup 5, it looked like, as soon as the Nuggets did that, the Timberwolves decided to go big, extra big, with Gobert at the 5 as well as Naz Reid in there at the 4. So, two actual centers, basically. Naz Reid's kind of a hybrid, but still 2 centers in there against a guy who's playing out of position and also isn't the most healthy, that he's been. And honestly, I thought that came up to bite them pretty big. Even though they didn't perform all that bad in those minutes, the Nuggets as a whole, down the stretch, then Aaron Gordon was clearly gassed as well. He was out of energy. Just asking him to do all that, and he played way too many minutes in this game. I think he got to 40, I want to say, something like that. Which you want, Aaron Gordon right now, the magic number is probably around 30, not much more than 30. You don't want to go too much higher than that. with all that he gives you out there, the energy he has to expend. And so there's multiple ways that I feel like you could do this better. Like I said in the preview, one of the options I would go to is potentially Zignagi, which I'll save for just a second. But firstly, like using Aaron Gordon as the backup five, like I said, overall, I just see too many problems with it. But even still, I feel like there's a better way to do that than they did it in this game, where, he's playing 40 minutes. Like, if you want to have Aaron Gordon as the backup five, you need to play Spencer Jones more to eat up those AG minutes in the lineups with Jokic. And Spencer Jones didn't even play 10 minutes in this game. So, I would like to see if they do keep going with Aaron Gordon as the backup five. I would prefer them to try that more, give Spencer Jones some more minutes. But, honestly, I would actually even prefer to keep going to Valanciunas maybe as the backup big, although I don't feel like awesome about that. I still feel like maybe matching up with Gobert at least in that second unit. That should be able to spell the Nuggets, to allow them to have the energy to come back in and everything. So I'm not completely against that game plan, I guess. But the one that I would, if I were the coach, what I would want to try would be to give Zeke Naji an opportunity. Just because, all you're asking for is like less than 10 minutes, 10 minutes max, to just give Jokic a break. Zeke is big enough to not just be bullied by Gobert inside. He's a good offensive rebounder. He's athletic and everything as well. But, the main thing is he's a player that's, even though he's not all that good and can sometimes have, really bad stretches, like he's not all that good compared to these other options that we're talking about, just as players overall. The advantage that he has is he can't really be game planned for in a way that a guy like Jonas Valanciunas or a traditional big man can be exploited. Like a coach will decide to run actions and getting those big guys in pick and rolls to expose them because you don't want to switch your traditional big men onto guards because they can't keep up with them on the perimeter. And so then that puts your defense, in a state of rotation and weakness, at a state of disadvantage. But that is not a factor with Zeke Naji being a ultra mobile big, very, very good at moving his feet and guarding wings as well as guards on the perimeter. So, even though he doesn't give you all of the other skills that Jonas Valanciunas does, he still does some of them at least good enough, in terms of like just being physical and rebounding. And then he can move his feet on defense and even spot up, from three at least as well as Valanciunas, maybe even better, to be honest. And that's all you're really asking for in those backup minutes. The Nuggets don't necessarily need somebody who can like carbon copy Jokic's game plan, play Jokic ball as like the playmaking hub like they do with Valanciunas. I think it would be more beneficial to kind of just break out of that mold a little bit when they need to in these playoff series. Jonas Valanciunas was a great addition for the regular season to allow those units to work that way, and he's less exploited in the regular season against different teams, seeing different teams every night, and this, that, the other thing, and all teams in the NBA just going a lot deeper on their benches with players sitting out and also just not playing your players as many minutes even when you're fully healthy. You see a lot of different players in that second unit, and so Jonas Valanciunas can be a lot more effective than he is in this context. And so that's why I would lean the direction of the schematic advantage that Zeke Naji would give you. The downside to Zeke Naji, where he can bleed value, I guess, would be, if you're trying to put him in those spots where he's the DHO guy, running handoffs, he has a lot worse feel for the game in that aspect than a guy like Valanciunas does. A lot more prone to turnovers, cannot put the ball on the floor, make decisions really, with the ball like a Valanciunas can, and obviously cannot just score, get to his own shot, create something on his own like Val can. And he's not the screener. He's not like nearly as effective as a screener as Valanciunas is. So, those are the downsides. But again, I just don't think that you need all of those things in that second unit with Jamal. But, and this gets into the other problem that I do want to talk about, which is the ball handling issue. So the backup guy for Jamal, like that, I talked about that in the preview as a main worry for me as a Nuggets fan heading into this series, like not having a clear guy that the Nuggets can go to as a primary ball handler without Murray being the primary ball handler. But, none of the options on the bench feel good enough to try, with Tyus Jones and Jalen Pickett being the two guys that are that mold of player. They are ball handlers. They are traditional point guards. But with Tyus Jones being really small and not shooting the ball well the past couple of years now, I just feel like he would maybe bleed too much value. Jalen Pickett would be the guy that I would like to see put in there to try, because he's been a very good shooter of recent. And he's traditional point guard, even though he's small as well, but he's very, very smart on the defensive end. I think he makes up for a lot of his deficiencies on that end. So, if somebody is tried in there, just to give somebody, to allow Murray some minutes where he can be off the ball and not like literally every single play shaking free of his defender without the ball, and then once he gets the ball, creating something. And even before that, he's the one dribbling up the ball up the floor against pressure to get the ball to Jokic and then set up off ball. Like, he's playing two positions at the same time all game. Playing 43 minutes in this game. Like, that's just too much to ask game in, game out of a guy like Jamal Murray. And this was the problem in the playoff run, or the finals run as well. And it's just starting to rear its ugly head here once again. But so, time for a quick break here. I will see you on the other side. All right, welcome back to this episode of the Hoop Theory Podcast. As we said before, we're going through this Denver-Minnesota Game 2, which ended 119-111, I believe, was the final score, which I don't think I mentioned in that first portion. But I would like to actually finish going through the game notes, because I never actually did that. Once I got to the clutch, basically, once I got to the second half, honestly, I started just kind of diving into key takeaways, that kind of meant for the discussion after the breakdown of the game play by play, basically. So I kind of did both of those in one, so you're not going to get as much of that, post these notes finishing. But just to finish these off really quick, I feel like the where I left off was basically, as we entered clutch, Jokic was being stonewalled by Gobert on a few possessions. The two-man game was drying up, like I said before, because Murray couldn't shake free of McDaniels, who was the main guy on him in the clutch, anymore, because he just didn't have any legs to actually break free and start and stop and gain separation to kind of run into the handoff. I think that's an underrated part about the Jokic-Murray two-man game. Is it's not just Jokic can set the screen and shake free of any defender just automatically. You also have to, as the guard, or Jamal in this case, you have to be quick in making a cut to get to the screen, get to the DHO, and curl off really tight, in a way that shakes free of the defender and makes it so the defender has to just run straight into the screen, essentially, or just find a way around it, which would be, it would cause some issues in trying to stay attached. But so, yeah, like I said in the first portion of this episode, that the thing that I didn't like about this game was Jokic not going to the things that were working, until the very end. And they weren't really working necessarily. It's just the things that are, the Nuggets' best game plan, bread and butter, the two-man game, and going to post touches for Jokic. He didn't start doing that until the very end of the game, and a little bit in the third quarter for the post touches with the weaker defenders on him, but not earlier in the game when he also had those weaker defenders on him, with Gobert missing so much time in this game. And also, Gobert he had such fresh legs because, like I mentioned, he barely played in the first half, and then also picked up, I want to say he picked up his fourth foul in the third quarter. Maybe he didn't actually, but part of me feels like he did. And then so he missed a little bit more time in that second half, I want to say. But maybe not. But anyways, he was, just a lot more fresh than everybody else on the floor. And he accepted the challenge. The crazy thing about the series so far, I think Rudy Gobert is the player of the series, honestly. If it were to end here after two games somehow with no winner, Rudy Gobert, I think, would be the series MVP, which is just kind of crazy to think about. But just the defensive impact that he's had across the lineup, as well as on Jokic in spots when he's needed to, especially in game 2. And then also offensively, crashing the boards and just being big inside, utilizing that presence and his length and size and athleticism in this matchup. He's been really good. But so the thing that I'm trying to get to is in that clutch moment. So this is with 19 seconds left in the game. They run the two-man game, and this is one of the possessions in the clutch that actually seemed like it was working. Jokic received the ball, barreling down the lane in the short roll, and he started going up with the floater, and the guy in front of him was Anthony Edwards, a guard, obviously very athletic, jump very high, but still a guard in front of him. Like 99% of the time, you're expecting Jokic to go up with that floater and make it. But for some reason, Jokic starts faking up with it like that. Ant leaves his feet, goes in the air, and he tries this wraparound, like lay down pass to Christian Brown, which successfully made it through barely because he had to brush it by Anthony Edwards' hip, essentially. And Anthony Edwards reacted to it. He saw the pass coming, and so I think he started to put his arm down, and so the ball got wedged between Edwards' hip and his hand there for a second, but it was able to squeeze through to Christian Brown under the basket. And he had like three guys around him at that point, goes up with, the ball and gets fouled, going to the free throw line, which honestly was pretty lucky. Like that, I just think that was a crazy moment. Like even more so than the moment that we're going to get to, which was Jamal's final attempt. I thought that was the even more blown part of it. And even Jokic admitted it afterwards, that he should have taken that floater there. It's just basically ever since Jokic has come back from injury, I think he's just been a little iffy, with his decision making in spots. He's been in a zone that I've never seen Jokic be in. I'm not sure why that is exactly. I don't know if it's having that long rest and then coming back right into very, very competitive basketball instead of like winding up in preseason and training camp and then entering the season. That's the only time we've ever seen him have an extended absence of basketball and then, start basketball again has been at the beginning of the season. It is the first time it's ever not been that. So it is interesting to see that, but it's very different, especially those first few games when he first came back, throwing some of those wild turnovers, and like those have slowed down almost entirely, but I feel like there's still some remnants of that every once in a while, even in this series so far. But anyways, Jokic should have, just taken that shot there, and he said that himself in the post-game interview. David Adelman, head coach, he did not take that approach. He more so said, I'm trusting the best player in the world to make those decisions in those spots, so he wasn't worried about it, which I understand that, that makes sense, like to say that. But I feel like there's this thing I've heard around the Nuggets organization in the past, is that maybe one critique you can make of that culture or the, system there is even when Michael Malone was there wasn't really anybody that ever felt comfortable. Maybe not felt comfortable is the word, but there was nobody that really would call out Jokic for anything or hold Jokic accountable, which rarely you need to, which is, maybe why nobody's gotten into that habit. But it also just, I feel like there might be, that's just something that I wanted to kind of point out, I guess, a thought that I had was that even in this regime with David Adelman, that's probably something that has continued, where David Adelman, every move Jokic can make is the right one, which, again, like I said, might not even be the wrong way to go about it because of how, good of a hit rate, Jokic has had, and maybe just sticking with him through this rougher stretch is the way to go without, dismantling it. But at the same time, obviously in an ideal world, you would think you'd be able to give, feedback and stuff like that and challenge a guy, especially when everything in the past, him before he was like the starting team and everything, he was very receptive to those things. Like he seems like a guy that would be completely and totally open to those criticisms because he often makes them about himself, to the media and publicly, So I don't know. I guess that was just something I kind of wanted to think out loud with. But the other play, though, that ended this game, because I guess I didn't mention Christian Brown missed one of those two free throws after getting sent to the line, and the Nuggets were down 2 at that point. So Jokic's floater would have tied up the game with 19 seconds left. But instead, the Nuggets were down 1 at that point. No time was wasted, though. Still 19 seconds on the clock when the Nuggets fouled Julius Randle to send him to the line, playing the free throw game. And he made both free throws, put up the Wolves by 3 at that point. So still with 19 seconds left, the Nuggets inbounding the ball, with time. And I think there might have been even a timeout left, I want to say, unless we used it right then to start that possession maybe. But regardless, 19 seconds left. You don't necessarily need a 3, obviously, in this scenario. But, the way you should execute in this scenario, typically most teams will tell you, It's either take the three to tie, or since you have so much time with 19 seconds left, you go for a quick two. And normally when you're going for a quick two, it's like you run a pick and roll or drive downhill to the rim, maybe get fouled, something like that, force the issue. Not typically settle for like a long two. Like at that point, it feels like you should just do the three, you know what I mean? Or go to the basket. But that's what Jamal Murray did, was he settled for the long two, which, like I said, I just gave you the reasons why, the critiques that you could have of that. There's a lot of people reacting to that pretty crazily. Like somebody I think it was Zach Lowe even said something like that it was the worst of all time, like of the quick two, the worst quick two in playoff history or something like that. I wouldn't go that far, and I didn't feel that bad about it. And like Jokic and Murray both said in the post game, like, that's a shot like Jamal makes a lot. Not really in that stretch of that game because of how I think gassed he was. A lot of his jumpers were just short. And that one was no different. So, yeah, I think that if he would have made it, obviously, you have time left. I think there was 11 seconds because he waited. That was the other bad part about it, is he waited a little long to do the quick two. He let 8 seconds get off the clock because they must have used the timeout before that possession because they inbounded the ball, I believe, at midcourt. So they didn't have to, bring the ball all the way up the court and kill all that time there, because a lot of that time was wasted just, Murray kind of deciding where to take the shot. And so, yeah, that was the final play of the game. Basically, that's what sealed it. I think they went to the line again one more time to put it themselves at 119, and then Murray just, ended with a half-court heave that missed. So, but, the game was over at that point. So, yeah, I think the final score I said earlier was wrong. It must have been, because I think it was a 5-point game at the end. I guess I could just look at it. And so that was the game, game two, and I'm feeling pretty good still about the Nuggets' chances. Obviously not quite as good as I did after game one. Obviously you don't want to lose one of those games at home when you're the higher seed to lose the home court advantage, because now home court advantage is in favor of the Minnesota Timberwolves. And so I guess I did want to mention, they mentioned it like a billion times on the broadcast, but I guess if you're not watching these games, you just kind of are listening to get caught up on it through me exclusively. This matchup, this rivalry that the Nuggets and the Wolves have had the past 30 games now, they are 15-15. So, it has been very back and forth, but not in the way that you would think, because there have been like so many it's like they trade haymakers, haymaker after haymaker, like how I just went through in this game. The Nuggets were up 19 in the second quarter, and then they were down 8 later in that same quarter. It might have even got worse than that, but the Nuggets were at least down 8 at 64-56 before they made another little run to tie it up at 64. It's just this matchup, these two teams going at it, is basically 9 to 12 point runs back and forth, between the two teams. That's the level that it is back and forth. Not really trading baskets. That's kind of rare when those stretches happen. I think another stat that was shared on the broadcast was in the Minnesota Timberwolves playoff history, their two biggest comeback wins in playoff history. This was the second one, this game that I just broke down, game two. And number one was, if you remember a few years ago, that series in 2024 in the second round, game 7, the Wolves being down 20 in the second half and coming back and winning that one. So that was the most at a 20-point comeback. This one was 19. But yeah, like I said, the crazy thing about that was they made that entire 19-point comeback in the same quarter that they went down 19. So interesting. That doesn't usually happen that way. That's just kind of the weird oddities about this matchup. And so definitely, like I said, not feeling as confident as I did after game one, because the way I was thinking about it after game one was more like, they have nobody to really stop Murray off ball. But I didn't index enough on the thought that I had before the series even started of Murray being tired. And like when he's the only guy to do all of those things, he's Steph Curry and Draymond Green, Jokic is the Draymond Green really of the offense, but you know what I mean? The guy who brings the ball up the court and then also runs around off the ball. There's nobody that can really do that to the same endurance level or stamina level that Stephen Curry can. And so even though Jamal Murray is like one of the most Curry-like players there are in the league, he's not quite to that same level of off-ball movement, just nonstop, constant all the time. And then also I've always kind of described him as more of a mix between Kobe and Curry, just stylistically, the way he plays. He's just got like the footwork and the post moves and stuff like that of a Kobe, but the off ball and 3-point shot diet and stuff like that as a Stephen Curry. So, but anyways, I'm kind of getting really off topic at this point. I did want to talk about other series going on in the postseason this year, because so far I've done like 3 episodes, one of them kind of a small one, but still done 3 episodes about this series and really nothing on the podcast so far about any other series. I did put out my bracket video. For those of you who have not seen that, go check that out on TikTok or YouTube, basically any social media, I believe, for Hoop Theory, and to see what my official picks or predictions were for the entire postseason. But as of now, I'm just going to kind of look at the first round where we're at and look at how it's compared or how things have kind of gone differently from what I thought they would. And so starting with the Eastern Conference 1-8 matchup, Detroit Pistons versus the Orlando Magic, this is one I'll probably have quite a few thoughts on, because heading into the series, I picked it to go 5 games in favor of Detroit, but Orlando, as we are currently sitting, is up 1-0 at the moment. And this is a series that I didn't really even think about like putting any real analysis into, because of how just dead in the water Orlando looked to end this season. For context, people who aren't paying attention, I'm trying to do the service of, providing context for people. But so to do that, the Orlando Magic over the past couple of years have been a very, very good defensive team and very, very big. They're a huge team throughout the 5-man unit with Wendell Carter Jr. there at the 5 at he's just under 7 foot. But then Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner are both like 6'10" and long and really good. Well, Franz is a very good defender. Paolo is pretty limited defender, but he has the size at least to be somewhat of a factor on that end. But then Jalen Suggs, one of the best guard defenders in the league, and he's got good size on him at 6'5", and he was a 5-star quarterback recruit coming out of high school. So he's got a good build to him as well. Anthony Black is like 6'7", 6'8", really long as well. Desmond Bane is like only 6'5", probably 6'4" even. Not super long, but he's really strong. Those are the main guys there. But they've got a lot of bigs coming off the bench too, with Goga Bitadze, who's like 7'1", and then Mo Wagner, the other Wagner, the older brother, at 6'10" as well. And so defense has never been a struggle for them. But the struggle comes with the offensive end, them having like no shooting at all. That's why they went and got Desmond Bane for like 3 or 4 first-round picks this past summer, hoping that he would be able to help them out there. I think he has at least a little bit, but he still, like, they don't get enough opportunities for him with just their lack of spacing. And then what really doesn't help is their lack of like schemes and real offense to get, shots and create plays and stuff like that. Like, it's just 2 things that just don't help each other out at all. Like the lack of spacing and then the lack of like innovative, motion offense. That's why I think their head coach, even if they go on a run, like it seems like they might be, at least, upsetting or having a competitive series here against the 1 seed. I still feel like Jamal Mosley, head coach there, is really on the hot seat for sure because of those reasons I just laid out. But so the reason why like vibes were at an all-time low with this Magic team just like not even a week ago was the last game of the regular season was going up against the Boston Celtics, who had nothing to play for because their seed was secured and everything. And they sat everybody. They had Baylor Shireman as their number 1 option on offense, Luka Garza, their second option probably. And Luka Garza is basically, he's probably their 3rd string center. Baylor Shireman plays a little bit when everybody's healthy, but very easily could not. He's like the 9th man on the team. And so, it's basically the G League Celtics out there who playing against the Magic, they had something to play for, because winning that game would have secured them the 7 seed instead of the 8, which would have given them home court advantage against the 76ers, who were Joel Embiidless, to enter the play-in. But instead, they lost that game while kind of playing around with it a little bit. They kind of took it as like a foregone conclusion that they would win because of how it seemed, Boston was not getting up for it. And they sat Desmond Bane after like 5 or 6 minutes of the game because, he played his 82nd game of the season. And so then they sat him thinking they wouldn't need him the rest of the time. And then later in the game, they had to bring him back to try to make a run to actually save things, but they weren't able to with some clutch play and performance from Luka Garza and Baylor Shireman. And also, required mention for Baylor Shireman as a Nebraska guy, not a Cornhusker, to the chagrin of my co-host here, Jacob Roth, on the show. Because Jacob hates Creighton is the thing. And Baylor Shireman spent 3 or maybe 2 of his collegiate years there as a Creighton Blue Jay. Before that, I think he was a South Dakota Coyote or maybe Jackrabbit, one of the two, SDSU maybe. Don't quote me on that. But so he's from Aurora, Nebraska, which is not too far away from where Jacob and I grew up and went to high school in Milford. So that's just pretty crazy. That's somebody from literally where we're from and was in the same class as Milford in sports, playing against them. That guy is getting buckets in the NBA and is like a real NBA player. Just kind of crazy. But anyways, the Magic, so their vibes are very low after that game, obviously. And then they've had very large struggles with staying healthy all year. All their guys just not being healthy at all, with Jalen Suggs and their best players in Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner especially. Franz Wagner just came back for the start of the playoffs, or really the start of the play-in technically. But so they go into the play-in and lose pretty decisively to the 76ers, who, were without their best player, and the Magic are finally at full strength, but not able to get it done. And then they go up against America's favorite team this year, the feel-good story of the season, and the Charlotte Hornets, the team that, like, post All-Star break or whatever it was, had the best net rating in the league. And so, everybody, also Detroit and Charlotte were like the dream first round series for everybody because of that brawl that took place that I'm sure you saw, even if you're not, tapped into the NBA day in, day out. A huge brawl took place earlier this year between the Hornets and the Pistons. And so people really wanted to see those two match up and go at it once again in this 7-game series in the first round. And but the Magic came out and just absolutely destroyed the Charlotte Hornets in that play-in game. And a big part of it was just all of a sudden Paolo Banchero, like people were so down on Paolo as the best player on the Magic. I still think you could call Franz, I think, is the most important or most impactful player on the team overall. But, Paolo's kind of the more traditional number one option typically. People were just so down on his stock all around. Like people were talking about it, like pretty crazy stuff going on. And just his decision making, he threw in that play-in game against the Sixers, he threw a pass at one point that was to absolutely no one at all. I don't even know what he saw on the play, to be honest. Maybe the ref is who he was throwing at. But the ball ended up nailing this lady in the head who was sitting in the front row looking at her phone. And she had to be like escorted out. Not escorted, but I think she looked like she had a concussion maybe. And I think that was actually confirmed after the game. I can't remember the details on that. But still, that was just kind of like the microcosm or like, snapshot moment of like, wow, this is getting really sour really fast for this Orlando Magic squad. And it looked like they were all depressed on the court. Like nobody wanted to be there. The players seemed like they had quit on their coach and quit on the season, is really what it felt like. And then that next game, they just come out and win by 30 against the Hornets. And everybody's just like, okay, that's weird. But like to pile on top of this, it got to the point before that game, before the Friday or the Friday play-in game against the Hornets that I just mentioned, right before that game, Magic fans were at the point that they were saying they didn't want the Magic to win. Like they were like, I would rather the Hornets make it in. Like, I want this to end. I want this season to be over. I want Jamal Mosley gone. I want Paolo Banchero traded. Like all that kind of stuff. They were just ready to be done with it. They were hoping that the Magic wouldn't somehow win that next game against the Hornets, which they did very, very emphatically. And then they come into this series against Detroit, and I'm thinking, that game against the Hornets, a little weird, but anything can happen in one game. Like weird games happen all the time. I still was not convinced of their ability to look like the team that everybody was choosing them to be, which in another key detail of context that I have not mentioned is preseason. This was right behind Cleveland and the Knicks, really. Maybe Detroit, like some people would put over them, but I think Orlando was the third most like predicted team entering the year to win this Eastern Conference. Their over underline was 50.5 wins. Like, yeah, they had higher expectations than this Detroit Pistons team, which this Detroit Pistons team is a 60-win team. This Magic team is 45 win. That's a 15-game difference, which is just insane. And again, like I said, health came into play with it, but Detroit hasn't been like super healthy either throughout the year, to be honest. And they weathered the storm through a lot of those injuries, especially to their best player. Somehow was able to make it through that pretty. So like at least pretty good, for the situation. And so, yeah, the way that Orlando has just turned it on in this series, and even after game one, so right after it happened, I didn't get to see a lot of it live. But it was just like, weird game ones happen all the time, as I just mentioned with the play-in game. It's very frequent for a 1-8 or, just kind of a series to have a weird game one and then a reverse sweep will happen. Especially with this Detroit team that I thought would need a little time ramping up in this series because of not having Cade for so long at the end of the season, still needing to get reps to get back into form. But the weird thing was Cade played amazing in game one. He had like 40 points almost. Nobody came along with him though, and some of their scrappy defensive athletic players they were kind of like the brand, the identity of the team beyond Cade Cunningham in this season. Those guys were relatively rendered neutral or rendered, unplayable. Like they had to take Asar Thompson out of the game. I think Jalen Duren also got taken out of the game. And yeah, that's just kind of weird to think about when you think about Detroit's season. But so the thing here is this was hiding in plain sight all along. If I would have just put more thought into it, but I really didn't, because I was like this. I had no hope or confidence whatsoever in this Orlando Magic squad. That I failed to think about. Detroit, the main advantage they have over everyone outside of Cade Cunningham creating offense for them is they are just going to be bigger, stronger, more athletic, and more physical than whoever they go against. That's like one of the key advantages they hold over every team they match up with. I'd say maybe the only team in basketball, especially in this Eastern Conference, at least in this Eastern Conference, because maybe Houston at certain points this year you could maybe throw in here. But I think Orlando even more so, though. Orlando is the one team that the Detroit Pistons are not bigger and stronger and more physical than. Like for all the issues that Orlando has, like they've had the worst offense the past like 3 years, have had the worst offense of any winning team by a large amount. Like maybe that they're probably close to a record in that category. Somehow you can make a stat, figure out a stat like that. I'm sure you can make one that would paint that picture pretty easily. But despite their struggles and all of the negative things about their team, you can't take away from them that they are big, strong, athletic, and just as physical as hell. And they will make you work for every point. Like they are a very, very good defensive team. And so that's why I feel like there is some level of worry that Detroit Pistons fans should have sitting in this series down 1-0 at home. I don't think it's nothing. I would still slightly favor Detroit, I would say, to make it out of this series alive. But I would not be surprised, honestly, at all if Orlando pulls this off. The way that these teams are just matched against each other, the way that they compare, I just feel like Orlando just pacifies or negates one of Detroit's biggest game plans or advantages that they hold. And Detroit's like that was the concern with Detroit coming into this postseason as well, is maybe they're a little bit too one-dimensional. They don't have enough layers to them in ways that they can hurt you. They are pretty simple when it comes down to it. It's basically those two things: Cade Cunningham creating offense, and them just being bigger and bullying you. but they cannot bully this Orlando Magic squad. That is for sure. And I've heard a lot of people picking the Orlando Magic as the favorite to come out of this series now, which I understand. I understand that thought or that prediction. But I'm still, like I said, I'm going to lean Detroit, but I think the worry level for Detroit should be pretty high at the moment, at least like a 7 or an 8. And so those are my thoughts on that series. I do want to get to the rest of them, though, so I'll probably have to go a little bit quicker here. But before we do that, I'll send you to a quick break here. I will see you on the other side. All right, welcome back. I'm just going to rapid fire break down the rest of the series in the playoffs right now. Staying with the East, though, we've got the Cavs versus the Raptors. I picked this series to go 6 games in the favor of Cleveland. I think it might even be shorter than that, honestly. Jakob Poeltl's looking like the worst contract in the NBA. The fact that they signed him literally like a year and a half, I think, before they even needed to. He can't stay on the floor already, and he's like 30-something. But yeah, the Cavs, I'm feeling a lot better about their chances. They were, for those who don't know, they've been kind of like a pet team of mine really early on when I first started the podcast. That was like during the Colin Sexton and Darius Garland era. And then Evan Mobley was like, he's one of my favorite players, non-Nuggets in the NBA. And people have kind of soured on him over the past year or so, kind of up and down over the past 3 years, really. But yeah, he's looking good. And this Cavs team is looking like way more cohesive and like what I thought in theory that they could be back when the Harden trade happened, how I was like, a big defender of that trade, I believe on the podcast even. With Harden, his main struggle and why people don't trust him at all, is like being a playoff performer late in series, just seems to be afraid of taking shots and makes, just cowers away from the biggest moments or whatever. But we've seen Donovan Mitchell have the same exact opposite, or the exact opposite, not the same, the exact opposite dynamic or situation than that. He comes up big in those big moments. Time and time again in the postseason, has big scoring nights. You can seemingly rely on Donovan Mitchell as your guy to try to carry you over the finish line. And I feel like in Mitchell's playoff career so far has had a lot of very unlucky ends to his, postseason runs that were really not because of him, to be quite honest. And a big part of the Cavs' struggles has been their second creator on offense, like having somebody outside of him. Because Darius Garland, in theory, is a great one for the most part. They have overlapping deficiencies on the defensive end and have things, that it's not a perfect fit there. But at least, he's another guy that can create things and control the ball. So it's not all on Donovan Mitchell all the time throughout like every moment of every game. But the thing is, a lot of times in the postseason, it end up being that way anyways, because Darius Garland rarely could stay healthy. And even when he was on the court at times in previous playoff seasons, he was playing through an injury that made him pretty ineffective. So, say what you want about James Harden, all his downsides or whatever, but one thing you cannot take away from him is that he has been very, very durable throughout his career and plays all the time. He's pretty much an Iron Man. So him just being there, like as somebody who can be a second side creator when Mitchell's on the floor, and then when he's off the floor, he can control the entire offense, take over all of the responsibilities of the number one option. He can do that. And I feel good about him doing that, especially when, James Harden, for those of you who just, don't understand what makes James Harden, he's one of the best pick and roll ball handlers that the game has ever seen, to be quite honest. And even now at his old age, he's still one of the better ones, or I'll say one of the best ones in the NBA currently as a pick and roll creator, especially with a lob threat, the roll man being an athletic guy with a good catch radius, can finish around the rim. He has 2 of those here in Cleveland with Jared Allen and Evan Mobley, and both of those guys you can play just by themselves, and you can pair them together with Evan Mobley being able to space the floor more in the past couple seasons. It's made it more doable to play both of them at the same time. But, just pairing Harden and Allen, their minutes with each other the whole game, and then pairing, doing the same thing with Donovan Mitchell and Evan Mobley's minutes, having those pairs, one of those pairs is always on the floor together. I just feel really good about the Cavs' chances of honestly coming out of the East. I picked the Celtics in my bracket to make it out. I am kind of feeling some regret. Like, I really wish I would have just rode with my Cavs. I thought about it. I'm not even joking you. Thought about it when I was making the bracket, but ended up just, I was like, I felt because of how the Cavs have collapsed past couple of years, and then how James Harden has collapsed every year of his career as well. It just, that part of it overrided, the optimism in me for some reason. Even though I've torn apart like logistically the reason why I feel like it's not. I feel like they're built to withstand that, in this current iteration of those two things meeting. And so I really just wish I would have stuck to my Cavs guns on that, to be quite honest, because I'm really feeling like they are going to be a force to be dealt with in this postseason, especially with Darius Garland. Like, I feel like having this as a season for him, if he was still here, I guess is what I'm trying to say, maybe this would have been the best season for them also. Like, this might have been the year that they put together their best run. Because in those past years, like, unfair to Darius Garland, he struggled with injuries, but not only he, a lot of the other guys struggled with injuries in the postseason as well. And this year, so far, only 2 games in, so knock on wood, obviously, the whole team is looking very, very healthy. And things are rolling and humming and working well. So feeling good about the Cavs. And also them playing in the second round, either a Detroit team that's going to be physically probably pretty beat up after what's going to be a pretty hard-fought series, or a team that is just much, inferior to them talent-wise, and just, schematics and system-wise for sure, in the Orlando Magic. And Orlando not having the same advantage over Cleveland that they do over Detroit. I mean, they have the bullying advantage, but it doesn't negate that. Like, the Cavs don't rely on that. You see what I'm saying? So it's not the same, kind of dynamic that Detroit is having in their series. So, yeah, and the
Raptors.
good story. I talked a little bit about them in the bracket video. I think that was enough, honestly. I think they're probably reaching their ceiling at the moment with the hodgepodge of players. I think that if they want to turn this into a contender in the East, they'll probably have to make a personnel move that's pretty major to find a kind of a more centralized star player to put alongside Scotty Barnes. I would imagine would be the keeper there for the Toronto Raptors. And then on to the 3-6 matchup, the New York Knicks versus the Atlanta Hawks. I picked this series to go 7 games, actually. And after game 2, I feel a little bit better about that outcome. After game 1, I kind of thought that it might be more like 5, maybe 6, but I thought the Knicks would win it, and I'd pick the Knicks to win also, just for that context. But, in the first game, I really felt like Atlanta just wasn't creating any good looks whatsoever, and I thought that would be a hard thing to continue to not be able to do in this series, because I don't know really what else you could change about it. The only times I really felt like Atlanta was getting good shots was off of, like, Karl-Anthony Towns' defensive breakdowns, which obviously you can rely on a few of those happening per game for sure. And then Jalen Brunson also, like, attacking him on the defensive end, I think has been very helpful, because there's no, like, the one worry as a Knicks fan that I think you could have looking at the series, because overall I still feel like the Knicks are going to pull this one out. But the one worry that I would have is the fact that it seems like there's really nowhere to put Jalen Brunson in this series defensively. No, literally no one in the starting lineup. Like, him guarding CJ right now has been, what people, or I guess the coaching staff, Mike Brown there in New York, has decided is the best option, which I don't blame him, because there's not a lot of good. The only other option that I could really think of that might be worth looking at is Onyeka Okongwu, the center on the Atlanta Hawks. So putting your point guard on their center, just to kind of make it funky and see, because that would just kind of force Atlanta into, not necessarily force, but maybe bait them into changing their game plan to something that might be a little bit less efficient, which is like, really exploiting that, putting Onyeka Okongwu in the post, posting him up. Maybe you want them to go to that, because he's not that skilled of a scorer in the NBA, even though that is a size disadvantage, obviously, for Jalen Brunson. Jalen Brunson's a little tank and a bulldog. He might be able to get enough, resistance there inside to make that a viable game plan. But, for the Knicks side of things, but that would be a really unorthodox, pretty funky thing to do, which Mike Brown is not that type of coach. So I would highly doubt that we see that. But that's just my thought looking at this series. Jalen Johnson, one of my favorite players in the NBA, continuing to ascend, being the crazy just star of his team in a way that he's like a little thing king at the same time as being a star. Those are my favorite types of players for sure. That's why, Jokic, not just because he plays for my favorite team, but that's why Jokic is my favorite player of all time, just being a all-time star, and offensive creator and everything, but then also being a little thing king, like doing all of those small things that impact winning that people don't really notice, and it doesn't go on the box score, and it's a pretty unselfish, way of going about things. Jalen Johnson is very good at a lot of those things as well, like, and physically could not be more different than Jokic. He's big. I guess that's where that ends. Very athletic and bouncy and long and switchable on defense and those kind of things. I do think defense is probably the area he could grow most. But anyways, enough about that series. Boston and Philly. I didn't even see this game, to be honest, the second one. The first game, though, I really thought, Celtics were going to handle this one pretty easily because I thought the Sixers actually played not that terribly for at least in stretches or in certain ways. Their backcourt didn't have the best game in the first one, but they combined for almost 60 points in the second game, with VJ Edgecombe going off for 30. But Paul George has been a note for me that he, in the first game especially, looked a lot better than I was expecting, for just the kind of trajectory, that his career has had over the past couple of years now, and then the suspension for 25 games that he had to serve, this season, and then coming back not all that long ago, really, when you think about it. But yes, I'm still picking the Celtics to come out of that one, maybe even still in 5. That was my pick at the start of the series. And then moving over to the Western Conference, we've got the Thunder versus the Suns. The Thunder are up 1-0 at the moment. I think they probably play tonight, I'm guessing, which for those, if you haven't noticed, because I think I said a game that happened last night, this second and third portion of this episode is a different day. I started this episode recording it yesterday in the afternoon on Tuesday. Today is Wednesday now, just in case that is confusing anybody. But the Thunder versus the Suns, at one point when I was watching that first game, I noticed that the Suns were playing a lineup with Haywood Highsmith at the 5, I believe. Maybe Dylan Brooks was the 5. So one of those two, I think, were the literal center in a lineup that was being rolled out there for Phoenix. I don't know what's going on there, really, to be quite honest. But yeah, this is the least interesting series, I think, out of all of them to me, even though I think the Suns have had a nice story on the season. And I love me some Colin Gillespie as well. But the Lakers and Rockets, this is one that's way more interesting. I thought the Rockets were going to win this one, but the way I described it in the bracket video was like that this was like the luckiest draw possible for both these teams because of how like beatable, like 100% beatable they seemed, or unwinnable, might be the better term. Both these teams seemed like they were going to be in the first round of these playoffs, but then just so happened to draw each other as their matchup, which works out. The Rockets having their injuries with Steven Adams earlier in the season, with the career, or not career ending, knock on wood, but the season ending injury for Steven Adams, and then in the preseason, or rather training camp, actually, Fred VanVleet, their point guard, and really their only viable point guard other than maybe Reed Shepherd, but doesn't get along with the coach, it seems like. Ime Udoka, who's another coach that might be on the hot seat, to be quite honest. Not even might be, like literally might be fired during the series at this point. But, the injury to Fred VanVleet was another big thing with them. And Kevin Durant, he missed the first game of this series, which was a big detail as well. But he was back for game 2. Didn't look necessarily 100%, but still, LA was very, very smart about the way that they disrupted him as a ball handler and forced him into 9 turnovers in this game. Even though he, had very good shooting night from the floor, like he did all the KD things that makes KD, but also did not handle the double teams very well and turn over the ball 9 times, like I mentioned. So this Rockets, it's crazy that they aren't going to be able to win this series. It's not over, obviously. They're going back to Houston now. But, heading into the series, you would have thought without Luka and Austin Reeves, who I said in the bracket video, the 2 best players on the Lakers, I would like to amend that slightly. But, you thought that the Rockets should be able to win this series with those guys out. And the reason I would like to amend that is because I felt a little bad after watching these first two games. I felt a little bad about demoting LeBron throughout the season, or earlier on in the season, to the third best player on the Lakers. I feel like, obviously as a shot creator or an option on offense, he's third when they're fully healthy behind Austin Reeves. But just the level of control over the game that he's been able to have in both these first two, at the age of 41, just he's like Jokic. He's like, him and Jokic are in that same breed of like the Magic, the Larry Bird. They just both have that gene. And so I think we're just seeing him be effective and control a game that they have no business winning, using Luke Kennard, who literally any team could have had this year if they picked up the phone and asked for him. And he's doing his best Austin Reeves impression, which honestly, not to talk down at all on Luke Kennard. I'm actually a big Luke Kennard fan. He's been a guy that I've always thought could have a situation where he could be very useful. He just is, he's a very good shooter and he has some like juice on the ball as well to create things, and really shooting anywhere, to be quite honest. And he's a good passer as well. So he does those things pretty well, but not quite to the level of like a star. But his other areas of his game, very like attackable on defense. He gives up a lot there. And, not the most athletic for like cutting and stuff like that off the ball. And he's also not a very aggressive shooter. I think that would be a big thing, is like, even though he's a really good shooter, he doesn't take a lot of, he doesn't really make the defense pay and like shoot against a closeout. Like if he's guarded even a little bit, he will pass out of it, And so that's kind of like hurting his value. But he has the ultimate green light though in this series, and so he's taking advantage and actually shooting more because the Lakers don't have any other options to go to. And I think LeBron has really instilled that confidence in him, and like he's using it as this like kind of like satellite, or like Jamal Murray or Steph Curry, as we talked about earlier in the episode. He's using him like one of those players, as just like a guy that's going to be cutting around off ball, finding him open looks, but from behind the 3-point line as well as going to the basket. And so I've just been very impressed with this Lakers attack and the way that they've played so far in the series. And basically, really the opposite could be said for my feelings about the Houston Rockets so far in this one, as well as Şengün. I'm not feeling good about Şengün. He's not looked good in this time here in this series so far. Obviously, I think better circumstances would maybe change that for sure, because I've seen him be the type of player that I previously thought he could turn into. But the other thing I actually did want to mention, and this is actually something I heard from somebody else, so this isn't original to me, but I heard somebody describe this series as a David versus David, and I thought that was just the most accurate way you could portray or describe this series with words. Not a David versus Goliath, but a David versus David. And then we've got Nuggets versus Timberwolves, which we all know is going on in that series, tied up 1-1, and I've talked a lot about it already. So moving on to the next one, which is the last one, 2-7, the San Antonio Spurs versus the Portland Trail Blazers. This one is also not up 1-1, and I picked this one to go 5 games in the favor of the Spurs. I think it will probably go maybe a little bit longer, because I don't know if Victor Wembanyama is going to be back for this next game, to be quite honest. He could be. I'm glad that it sounds like nothing more happened to him other than a concussion. If you didn't see the play, he face planted on the court at one point. His giant like 7'5" body went down pretty aggressively, and I think he had his arms, either his arms were like stuck behind him, or he had his hands on the ball in a way that like he couldn't brace his fall as he went down pretty awkwardly. And it looked like in the slow-mo, like he could have had like jaw issue, like maybe a fractured jaw or something like that. So it could have been a lot worse. But sounds like he's just under concussion protocol. I think he actually tested positive for a concussion, I want to say. And so I think the protocol on that is 5 to 10 days, I want to say, is what I heard. But then I heard somebody else say that he might be back for this next game because it's on Friday. So I don't think that makes sense mathematically. But still, this series is fun because I like both these teams quite a bit. And I do think the Spurs will still probably pull it out, because even without Wemby, I think they have a chance here for sure. They're very, very talented, even without their star big in there. But then one thing that I did want to mention about the series is I don't understand. I watch a lot of Portland Trailblazers like throughout this year. They're like currently my pet team. Like I mentioned, Cavs kind of before were my pet team. It's still, and it's kind of reigniting now. But Portland Trailblazers over the past 2 years now have been really my main pet team. And because I love Denny Avdia and Toumani Camara mainly. And also guys like Matisse Thybulle coming off the bench, and Jeremy Grant, who is a former, Syracuse Orange, who I used to cheer for. He was on the team where I really was paying attention to Syracuse at the time, and also a former Nugget for a year, although that didn't end super greatly of how he left for the same amount of money that we offered him just to have a bigger role in Detroit on a terrible team at the time. But the thing I wanted to mention was I don't understand how Donovan Clingan, like, I think his numbers are maybe in the low 30s for percentage on three-pointers, but the way every time I hear anybody talk with their mouth about Donovan Clingan and his shooting, it's always like, oh, he barely shoots. Like, he shoots a little bit, but he doesn't make them like a great rate and everything, which when you look at the numbers, that bears out. But I must have seen every single three he's made in his career so far. I swear. Because every game I watch of him, he makes at least multiple in the first quarter. I swear. And even in the couple games that I've noticed this where I hear somebody else talk about the game afterwards and mention something about, oh, like Clingan made a couple and then, but then he started missing a lot or something like that. I'm like, I don't remember him missing, honestly. Like, I only remember him every time I see him taking a three, it goes in. I don't know why. But I just find that interesting how that pattern is continuing to hold up in this postseason as well. But Scoot Henderson in this game too had an insane one. This was really the Scoot game, which is great to see for the people who are fans of him making it work in his career after looking like a bust early on, for sure. But, Denny going to the rim is like the main, way that they generate offense there in Portland. And obviously, coming into the series, the main thought was, what is that going to look like with Wemby, down there protecting the rim? Because all of the times they match up in the regular season, Wemby was not available in those games. So we never actually saw that dynamic and how that affected Denny's game plan and how he was going to be generating baskets, because he drives more than anybody in the league. He's overtaken SGA as the drive king, at least, per game or whatever. So Denny, interestingly enough, had a great game one, 30 points or something like that. I think it was like 30, 10, and 5, I want to say. And in the second game, where Wemby was out for the majority of it, because he went down with that injury, I believe, in the second quarter, he only ended up with 14 on this game. I think, honestly, just because how much Scoot had it going, to be quite honest. But yeah, anyways, those are just some of my quick thoughts, I guess, on this Spurs and Trailblazers series. Hopefully, I'll be able to get an episode here soon with Jacob back so we can talk about his thoughts as well. We could, kind of go back and forth, have it more of a conversation. But we'll see on that, because he's been very busy and moving once again. And as well as he, just started a new job where he is very busy. So I guess we'll see on that, but I'm just hoping for the best. But anyways, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy the rest of these playoffs and have enjoyed the playoffs so far like I have. Stay happy, stay healthy. I will talk to you guys next episode.